Does this work? Oh, one person out here on YouTube. Yo, what's good? I hope you can hear me just fine. I'm trying to get all set up out here. Let's see how that is going. Oh, Christoph is there. Let me add Christoph to the stream. All right, private chat. This tool is so cool. Let me full screen this, switch monitors. You can kind of like see what I'm up to there and maybe present my screen. Okay, yeah, cool. So that works. Move that to another monitor. Where can I move it? Let's see. Well, I'll just keep it there. No sound from, okay, no sound. Mic check 1, 2. Let me see. Audio. Mic check. Weird. I do see the icon lighting up. You can see it on my screen right now. It seems to be responding. I can do a check on my phone. It's funny, like every time I start a stream, I still have to figure out what does or doesn't work. So back on my phone, my channel. Here we go. Oh, so back on my phone, channel. I hear myself. So there is sound being broadcast. Not sure what the reason is why you're not hearing anything, Christoph. Do you have like settings that you can review for? Let me see, edit mic settings. I don't see a microphone on. Interesting. Weird. I'm just gonna add you to the stream and then we figure it out in the process. I hear something now. It must be you. Let me text you privately. I hear you now. Say something.
Do you hear me?
Yes. I hear you. Let's see. You don't hear me. Interesting. So if you go to YouTube, how do you see this on YouTube? If I were to go to youtube.com, see Bina, do you hear anything there? Let me just take this. All right. Do you hear anything there? So I hear it just it's pretty loud. Take this. Let me pause.
Yes,
Right.
do
You hear anything there?
I hear you on.
I hear it just it's pretty loud.
This with echo.
Pause.
Yes,
Right.
I hear
Do you hear anything there?
I hear
That echo. Let me mute myself. I mute my. How do I mute myself? I unmute again. 3 people. It's like practically a full house. We can take like a small Volkswagen and call it a party. 3 people. Is that my lucky day? All right. So what was I up to today? Bunch of meetings. Spoke with investors, not for the reasons you think, but to get a sense of how their deep tech companies are getting things done. And that was extremely insightful. Now, let me grab some water while we're at it. And I believe that Christoph is already in the room, so I believe Christoph can unmute, but let me let me leave it up to Christoph to decide when to do that. Yeah, so that is roughly. Oh, I got comments. Okay, let's see what's going on, peeps. You can hear me here. Voigt, ha! What's good? Good seeing you here. Welcome to the stream, the little Dina show, hacking away, doing some random ish. So yeah, what was up today? Speaking a lot to investors to get a sense of how their companies are solving tricky problems, and that is really meaningful because it's a challenging space for us to explore. We have a lot of our own opinions because we've built tricky tech throughout our careers between all the founders. Um, and we kind of want to know we're not completely losing it. Maybe there are companies out there that have solved these problems and are happy and aren't as frustrated and miserable as we are. So that's why I'm talking to these investors that are working with deep tech companies. And they seem to feel the same pain. So they all kind of like outlined that this is kind of like an issue. They're introing us to their portfolio companies. So we're going to figure out from them what we can do better. So yeah, I'm quite excited about all the meetings that are going to start happening soon. Then after these investor calls and also some talent calls, I spoke to a person I met at Web Summit who runs a large talent pool, and we just figure out how much talent we can get from them. So that was really interesting as well. Then I had a chat with Matt to talk about the copy for the landing page, which we dropped online, and he walked me through a bunch of really useful points on how to formulate copy. I mean, like I've learned a lot of things. Like, oh, geez, have you ever heard of the Eugene Schwartz levels of awareness? Now, that's something I wasn't aware of. That's why I'm a big believer in just hiring help when you need it, and just not have to skimp out of paying people. You get accelerated so quickly when you just pull people in that know their shit. You re-enter because of camera stuff. I see you now. Christoph, you're visible, loud and clear. I just don't hear you. I add you to the stream. Okay, that was my mistake.
Yeah. Hello.
Yeah. Hey, hey, hey. Cool, cool,
Nice.
cool. So
Ah,
here we are. You're on screen. We can do so. You can see my screen right inside of this thing. I've been using this tool because a friend of mine recommended it, and it's so
I
easy. Like I can
don't
do
think
things like this.
ever quite.
Then did you say something, Christoph?
Ever really long delay.
Oh, there's a long delay. Oh, okay. I don't know why that is. Uh, Internet in Asia is pretty mental, like as in mental good. Um, Show more info. Holy shit! I wish I had this type of connectivity in Berlin. This is impressive. I think we all should just pack up our bags and come work from Bangkok. Internet is real good. I don't think it's on my end, Christoph, the data lag thing. Looking at I mean, like, hang on, I'll show you. I was just at fast.com trying to track uh, the bandwidth that we have out here, and it seems to be pretty beefy, like 92 down, 86 up, and we're talking about megabits. Um, so I just have to talk slower then. Ah, you get the sound from YouTube. No way, the sound from YouTube is faster than through StreamYard? Ah, okay, that's why. So there's just no way that you could get audio on StreamYard to work? This is interesting. Okay, let me know when you finally register something. The beep. What's the beep for? Now I'm confused. I didn't get a signal from you, but then I heard beep, and I don't know where it's from. Hmm. Um, I don't know what to do about that.
No, I think now it works. Right.
Mic check.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a
Ah,
a
yeah,
good response
perfect.
time.
Okay,
Nice.
it was on my end. Like,
Oh, good. Yeah, I mean, like I was showing you like I have 92 megabits down and then 86
no, no,
upstream.
no. Everything is fluid. It was just like I didn't get sound from StreamYard, and then I joined the YouTube, and then I got like
Uh-huh.
the sound from YouTube. But of course, like the delay from like going back from
Mm-hmm.
here to YouTube, and then YouTube streams it out.
Cool. Yeah.
So
Okay.
now
Now,
we
now
know
it's
that like people seeing like what we have done 5 seconds ago. So
yeah, exactly.
it's a little bit like a
It's
time machine.
yeah, it's definitely like a oh my goodness. I'm surprised that there's still a bunch of folks in there. I saw like Voigt is in there. That is dope. That's a person I worked with before. Super happy to see them. So we have a little bit of an audience today. I was actually expecting that, as with many of the streams, I start pretty solo and then gradually my mom checks in to see what I'm doing, how I'm doing. Because my mom's like, ah, I can hear your voice, see a little bit what you're up to. But actually, other people other than my mom are showing up, which is a good signal. Although I would love it for moms to show up again. So yeah, what we were doing just now, I was flipping through the deck that Matt provided, which is something on Figma about the buyer's journey to kind of like inform the landing copy or the improvements I can still make to the landing copy. Which I'm sure you've seen some of this stuff before, because if you tell me about like the Eugene Schwartz level of awareness now, that's an area where I know nothing.
I never heard about Eugene Schwartz, but it looks like like one of these funnel things.
Yeah.
So there are a bunch of them. I think the most um, famous are the pirate metrics, the ARRRR. So
Pirate metrics. I'm
or
writing it down.
pirate funnel. It's double A 3 times R. I think it's awareness acquisition, or I'm so bad in remembering that.
I see that
Um,
funnel, AAR funnel,
yeah.
awareness, acquisition, activation, retention, okay, referral and revenue. All right. Huh. Okay. So interesting. I haven't heard of any of these frameworks yet. Um, so the
So it's
the
like
the
about how people the basic idea behind everything, and the pirate metrics have like some twist to it, but
Mhm.
is like how are people finding out,
Yeah.
how are people like considering your product, then also looking at decision stuff. So uh, for you, for example, there might be some friction in the B2B space, that
Yeah.
the people who are using it and are stumbling upon it are different people than they are deciding, and then maybe also different people have to spend the money and do some approval process or whatever.
Hmm.
So that's usually something you um, when you when you're in a sales thing, then you have like different phases also. So especially in B2B, there are sometimes quite long sales phases.
Hmm.
For you, probably it will be pretty product led. That means that people starting to use the product and at some time will try to get the money or have their own budget,
Hmm.
which is now also the nice thing that like a lot of startups, the teams has budget, or like smaller organization units have budget, so they can like start
Yeah.
using something um, without going to, I don't know, the head of finance to get approval for a tool or something like that.
Yeah. I hear you there. Yeah, that's kind of like the sweet spot that we're aiming for, definitely. And I'm definitely not having my eyes set on enterprise right now. I think that would be
Yeah.
tactically inconvenient and a
Yes.
waste of our energy.
Yes.
So we're just focusing on the folks that will use it first. We'll figure out how to make the money on the way. I think we just have to generate value, very strong value first. And then I believe that generating some cash from that should
Mm,
follow. That's at least,
mm,
I feel that it's a logical, how do you call that? That basically the cash will follow strong value.
yeah, of course.
So Yeah, but I'm also like, that's also why I'm doing these interviews with these different startups to figure out like, hey, Stefano is also here. Hey, Stefano, good to see you. Um, I feel that oh, by the way, Stefano, you're going to be happy to hear that I had the chat with call. We spoke about the wait listing. I changed the landing page already such that the call to action on the wait list doesn't lead to a survey anymore. It now will lead you to an actual waitlist registration form. And then I'll follow up from that with an actual email in which I tell people like, oh, we're kind of like working on this, as you already know, because we said waitlist, not sign up. Do you want to like help us figure out like the focus areas to focus on right now? So I know that Stefano was very unamused when I had the waitlist link or the CTA leading into a type form, even though I've seen like 80% of HN of YC startups basically do that. Lead people through to a type form, get data, and then move on. But I got a bunch of data points where it was suggested that maybe I should do it differently, and Stefano was a big part of that.
Yeah,
So
I think
yeah,
it's smart also because then you first like really collect the contacts and then you can reactivate them also at some point. So if you launch, you
yeah,
can send out for everybody, things like that.
yeah.
But back to this, you said that you have talked to a bunch of startups, and I think that's quite interesting to how to activate people from the current website, because
Hmm.
the pain points they hopefully like talk to you about are probably the points you can like pick people up with.
Sure, definitely. So for all the people that we've been talking to, we've been getting like a clear sense of what is painful for them, and for some recall is more problematic than metrics, for example.
Mm,
And so that gives me a clear idea on who do I call for what. I also already know like some people are heavily using repos already. Some of them aren't because they have like a lot of non-engineering types that really need to engage with the content. So for them, like higher fidelity um, like access layers to that data would be really important. So
mm,
until I have that, there is no point in following up with them. So it's giving me a much clearer lay of the land. But I do feel like it's also obviously much higher maintenance. So the initial drop into the survey gave me a lot of filtered data that I could basically like qualify people on, where I could see
mm,
like, oh, we use this and that. I am in this position. We don't have these problems. I know like if you're not in pain, I don't need to call you. Or I call you to get a sense, especially if you're on the engineering side, I call you to get a sense of what the hell have you done that is different that I need to know about, because maybe I just need to adopt these practices and then we're done, right? And then we don't have to
yeah,
build something around this.
yeah. I think especially important now at this phase is to really keep an open mind, because
Mhm.
like the the vision is quite broad. So the vision is
Mhm.
like quite broad, from documentation over project management
Yeah.
um, to a high sense of collaboration.
Hmm.
Um, so the biggest question would be like where to start, like how, and there are a lot of tools out there and there are a lot of
Yeah.
solutions out there, but what is like the the key pain point nobody of them is really addressing?
Yeah. Yeah. So I feel the key pain point that none of them are addressing, all of them are still pretty clunky-ish to use or heavy.
Mm,
I want lightweight stuff that's like repo proximity, a very strong repo proximity.
mm,
Um, and that is kind of like one reason why there is often a disparity between data in repos or code in repos and
mm,
actual wiki information. Um,
mm,
and I feel even with managing progress, people have to jump between two different tools to say like, oh, this task that you define that basically only has a relation to this particular code artifact, I have to go to this different place to update you on something or to ask a question about the details of the work, which probably
mm,
should be in the repo itself because it's still relevant documentation even if it's resolved, right? So if I had that log of changes and discussions inside of the repo itself, I may be able to grep for things and get contextual information without having to jump between boxes.
mm,
Um, And
How is
then
this
I feel
different from GitHub issues or something like that?
GitHub issues is a lot closer, but it's still, again, the tracking of the progress, and the comments that are connected to them, they're only accessible through the GitHub projects API. They don't persist everything into something that I can quickly navigate on my machine. And I, as a dev, I probably grep more things than other people can imagine is possible, right? I'm basically, every time I'm looking for a keyword for something, I just grep the files on my system, maybe all of them, depending on whatever I need. And that's an extremely quick way for me to like connect dots. I do them across repos, whatever. If I have to do it on GitHub projects or GitLab projects, or I could do it on Confluence, but then I have to talk to the API. And I mean, like GitHub and GitLab have pretty decent APIs. Confluence doesn't have the best API. Notion doesn't have a really great API either. They started end of last year to start cooking one. I haven't looked at the ClickUp API, but look, again, like all of these tools are where your data is effectively domiciled in their database. If you need to work with it, you have to extract it first. And in our case, we're basically keeping data first in plain text formats on file systems, which is pretty much the most primitive way to deal with this. We'll add whatever level of intelligence is necessary on top of it to make it work. But if all the tech collapses, you can always open Notepad and you can still read what's going on. It's effectively the hacker's dream, and in a weird way also the archaeologist's dream, I guess, because they will be able to like figure out, like 50 years from now, archaeologists will be able to read plain text files in Notepad XX or whatever it's going to be called in the future.
In the metaverse.
Yeah, exactly. Just navigate it spatially in the metaverse, with whatever like overlays could be on top of it to make it more consumable. So yeah, I think that's the fundamentally big idea. And then some of the experiments that we ran last or 2 weeks ago when I was at Web Summit were mostly about how do we extract like secondary or tertiary or basically derivative insights from that text. And the nice thing is, like, if I give you plain text, I can do cool things with prompting that would cost me a little bit more effort to do if I have to do like multiple individual API calls. Right now I can basically just take the full doc, run it through a model, basically fine tune it, run a prompt, and then get, like, for example, we did paraphrasing of sections. I could do like a very technical write up and then paraphrase it for a business person or paraphrase it for a junior product manager, so they still have a moderate clue. And I could probably even entertain them asking questions about the subject matter and trying to phrase answers to it, so that I tailor it to their needs, which is kind of like the angle that we're looking for. So that is the one thing that I think would be really cool. And where the entire space is going, we're going to lighter models, like machine learning models. So I can already see that somewhere in the next year or two, like you're running Stable Diffusion on your machine right now, on a commodity machine, you should be able to run language models on commodity machines and then figure out like, the prompting that I did back then only with OpenAI's GPT-3, I can kind of like do on my machine. It's not the best, maybe not as high fidelity, but it kind of like helps me get some work done. It gives me some paraphrasing that isn't perfect, but it's informative enough for me to get answers. Yeah, that is kind of like the angle there. And that's also why the strong plain text focus is there, because I think simplifying the problem is a sensible approach right now.
Yeah, I would really emphasize on talking to more devs and understanding like how they're documenting slash how they are deciding on stuff, because that's a little bit the realm I hear there. So that like, okay, we have GitHub issues, we have like whatever, but really you're coming from a quite development heavy perspective, I would say. And really looking like what is happening there also, where you don't have to like in the first steps influence like a whole organization to switch to a different tooling or whatever, and you can then yeah, I don't know, even like say, okay, at some point we can do an export for a Confluence page because the whole organization needs a Confluence page.
Hmm.
So, but as
Yeah.
a first,
So
yeah,
mhm. I hear you there. So the dev focus is very much because the entire team that's building this, like at least also the co-founding team, is very strong on either the research and the engineering side. So
mm,
it's a world we know, and it's a world where we've seen, because of
yeah,
due diligence work, we've seen like 50 plus companies struggle with this.
yeah,
And developers are expensive. So
yeah,
there's a clear incentive for them to get this right. There are a lot of companies where you find developers move out of a company and they had their private repository of markdown files that they never shared, that are
yeah,
inaccessible.
exactly, yeah,
You also have the problem where the developers very more and more are getting their individual budgets to like make choices on certain tooling things. So, oh, we need a tool for diagramming, we need a tool for this. So they could, in their own little silo, use this tool for internal documentation without having to force the entire company to get on board. And then gradually we could not leapfrog, but we could convince the rest of the org to appreciate what you have there.
yeah,
But trying to tackle everything head on would be too much and also lack of focus. So I think
exactly,
the research engineering space is a sweet spot to start, where there is a clear value
yeah.
proposition.
And
Yeah.
also, if I understand that correctly, you're building on top of org, right?
So we're building on top of org and Markdown, but because
Yeah.
org has a bunch of capabilities that if you're just writing text if you want to use like the overlaying rich text editor, you're
Mm,
probably not going to see that it's org and you're not going to care, but you're going to have the capability of making things into
I know.
tasks,
Yeah,
progressing,
yeah,
blah, blah. If
yeah.
you just want to write Markdown files, we can read and present them to you, but you don't
Mm,
have all these bells and whistles because they don't exist in the standard. But it's
yeah,
fine because then
yeah,
you just get a reduced feature set.
yeah.
Um,
Because I think
yeah.
that's also an interesting angle because, as you said, like a lot of the devs already do something like that. So they use
Mhm.
org, they use Markdown, they use whatever, have it somewhere in the repo, somewhere on a personal repo, somewhere I
Exactly.
don't know where. Um,
Yeah.
and to unearth this and also have like in then probably that would be probably quite interesting to talk um, to more devs in teams also
Mhm.
how they organize the small stuff.
What do you mean with the small stuff?
Yeah, so like this small documentation stuff. So because they're probably documenting for each other, are they documenting a lot within code? Are they using the documentation and also like that's also an open question I hear. Is it like more about like documentation for the long term or is it more about the
Hmm.
discussions around it? Because discussions probably happen
That's
a
on
lot
Slack, right?
around on yeah on
Yeah,
Slack, but also in code reviews probably.
exactly. So basically,
GitHub
you look at
issues.
MR threads, exactly. Issues, merge request threads, and Slack is where a lot of it happens.
Yeah.
At least the shorter term stuff. To the question where people mostly document things, def no, basically avoid. The gross majority is not documenting things. That's effectively what you'll find for most of the teams that that we've talked to. They
Yeah.
have some things in their either on their notes on their own computer because they also feel this barrier of entering it into a public record, where they feel like,
Yeah, the
I have
question
like
is where
some.
the
Mhm.
pain point is right now,
Yeah.
and so also unearthing these examples where they try to figure out why is this bit of code like that. For example, how are they approaching this currently? Are they searching through every documentation thing they have? Are they just
No.
don't think? Are they talking to each other? Is it a really a pain point, or
Mm.
is everybody like, yeah, it doesn't matter in the end, or I know whom to ask.
Hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah.
So I would go deeper into this stuff.
Yeah.
How really the teams are working currently, and
Hmm.
where their pain points around like describing their work and things like that are also like looking at the whole process. So we talked about that also there's like usually quite some stuff around like process diagrams, things like that. If this is like part of the thing, like also is
Yeah.
architecture part of the documentation? Is this the interesting part? So what's the interesting part? Is the interesting part describing the function, or is the interesting part describing the architecture?
Do you have to pick one? Because I think that the function and the architecture, they all belong in documentation. I don't, even in my own experience, when I work on architecture, I sketch, okay, we're gonna set it up like this. There's gonna be a load balancer there, then we're gonna have like this event, basically we're gonna do something with like queues or whatever there for this reason, because function. There's almost always this relation of function to whatever artifact we're sketching. So I don't know if you can have them live in
And
isolation. If you do have them live in isolation,
just
then
like
one of the points that I, Mhm.
how are you using that afterwards? So are you coming from so what's the problem people are running into with like having an established project, seeing something, and then it's like, are they looking at the function and it's like, why is it like that, and how is it
Oh, you mean
connected to the bigger
function in
picture?
code?
Yeah, function and
Ah,
code.
yeah.
Sorry,
Okay.
yeah.
I hear you. I thought you meant like function as in the functioning of the system.
No,
Okay.
no, no. I mean function in code. Yeah, like
Yeah.
a class or whatever. It doesn't matter, but
Yeah. I think that really depends on a per person level. Worked with a lot of engineers who have a question about something, then first look for documentation on it, and
mm,
then as a last resort, read the code. And then you have a lot of other developers who are like, source is the highest level of truth. I read the source
mm,
code first, and then I try to find out if there's either context in the comments in the code or it is elsewhere.
mm,
But then there are also other artifacts you create as an engineer where the context or the comments or the documentation can't live inside of the artifact. Like when
mm,
you're doing like circuit boards or you're doing like mechanical CAD designs. Some of these
uh,
tools don't
yeah,
always have ways for capturing the documentation there. Now, with some
mm,
of these code, these EDAs, these basic electronic design automation
yeah,
tools like KeyCut or Altium, you can
yeah,
lock things inside of um, version control systems. Um, and then have documentation inside of this version control system such that
mm,
you can make changes to the circuit boards and at
yeah,
the same time in parallel update the documentation to keep them in parity. I
mm,
think I think that is a very important usage paradigm because very often if you don't have this hard locking between artifacts and documentation, you end up with this problem where there's this thing in Confluence or Notion. I don't know for the life of me to which extent it's still current. So I have to poke people to explain to me if this is the right thing to
yeah,
look at.
yeah,
Or I spent like half a day looking at the documentation, thinking it reflects what I see here, and being confused, and maybe trying a couple of things, and by trial and error converging on answers, and then maybe understanding like, oh, so the documentation said that, but it's superseded by something else in the meantime. Um,
mm,
that would be a bit harder to accomplish if you had them closely locked. Also,
yeah,
then you have the benefit also of going back to an older version and not having to wonder, how do I find this old state in documentation that might be in Confluence or Notion that maybe was the design from half a year ago? We tried to build this hard thing. We went into a tangent. Half a year later, we'll realize this difficult thing isn't working. We have to work with a different chip, different sensors, blah, blah, blah.
mm,
So we go back to a build from half a year ago. But in the meantime, the documentation has organically grown into something else that we can't just
yeah,
easily say, go back to the state half a year ago and we'll take it from there.
yeah. But the hardware is also probably another story, right?
In which case, because like that's a beautiful thing. I think that in many spaces, the core artifacts are becoming increasingly more plain text.
Yeah.
So in hardware, the core artifacts are plain text files where you sketch your circuit board
Mm,
or even your chip design. You could codify in something like Verilog or VHDL, which is effectively code. So a lot of things are effectively code under the hood. You simply don't see it because you're using these high fidelity interfaces to access it.
Yeah.
Some things are still
But
binary.
that's what I mean. That for hardware, so of course, like in the end, it's yeah, code, hopefully plain text stuff. But the workflows and it's just how I imagine it, like how people are working with the stuff, how they daily rhythm looks like, how they are working with documentation. I can imagine that it's differently than with software because it's not so fluid, it's not so fast.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
probably for hardware, you anyways have to have documentation for more or less debugging and whatever. But I really have no clue about hardware design. So
Yeah. Yeah, so with the I would argue you must have documentation when you're doing almost anything. The question is how much documentation. I also think that documenting for the sake of documenting is also not the objective. So you have to figure out the balance. I bumped into plenty of hardware design companies that had extremely sparse documentation that wasn't sufficiently informative. So they keep it in heads effectively. So the question there is what's the barrier to document things, and
also
that
interesting. Yeah.
and that's why the thesis, underlying thesis, is drop the barrier to entry so far that there isn't much of a friction point to impede that from happening. So I want people to also take their initial scribbles, even if they're crappy scribbles, or even their initial ideas around something. I want them to record them such that other people can have that contextual awareness. And then maybe even trigger from that eventually, like some insights as to Christoph worked on this thing or looked into XYZ. David is starting to look into the same topics. You two should talk. If the tool can make it clear for people to realize, like, ah, snap, I'm kind of like reinventing a wheel. Christoph looked at it. Maybe you looked at it a year ago, so things are different. I could still leverage the knowledge you have to fast track me into what you learned, and then to allow me to kind of like figure out what the diff is.
Yeah. Yeah. So what I'm trying with my question
Yeah.
is helping you to finding a specific niche with a specific pain point.
Yeah.
You know, my feeling right now is that like it's quite broad, and there are like everybody knows that documentation is a pain. Looking up documentation is problematic. Understanding things is really hard. A lot of this, I think, is also an organizational problem, which might be hard to solve by software.
A tool. Yeah.
But for sure, there are like plenty of very interesting opportunities in there where tooling and especially plain text stuff is a really interesting approach, because we see that also looking at the market. We see that now everywhere. So Obsidian, Logseq, a lot of tools are going down the let's get back to the basics, and and for especially for developers, it feels just natural.
Yeah, that's also why right now I like that you're saying like the focus thing. That's why right now we're not talking about like people working on biotech stuff or like robotics engineers. We're just talking about software developers for now, because that is a very small sliver of people that we can work with, but it is a very focused group, and we know we intuitively feel that we know quite a bit about this cohort, and we're talking a lot with people from this cohort already. So I feel that that's kind of like the initial focus, and if we fan out later on when we find PMF on this cohort, that is totally okay. But right now, I wouldn't shoot for everything because simply energy, I can't burn all of that energy on all those fronts. So I totally hear
I
you.
would even try to cut this smaller. So software engineers in which companies, software engineers in which situations.
Yeah, software engineers in companies building hard tech. So we're talking about deep ML companies. That's very much software engineers or software engineers writing firmware for like applications where documentation is required. So we're talking people building robots. Like one of the co-founders is from a company they built robots before. They had problems with documentation, keeping things in parity, because every time they change the code, they have to go into Confluence or whatever, make changes, and that was a massive pain point. The same would happen for people that are building like medtech devices that need to keep that parity between between their software they're building. Still just software people, so we're not necessarily talking about the folks doing the hardware there. It's still the same cohort, software developers, but it's really for companies that have hard problems that they're solving. So it probably wouldn't be super interesting for a SaaS company or an ad tech company that isn't building something that's fundamentally really difficult. But it's more interesting for companies doing moonshots.
Yeah. And how many did you try to map like their documentation habits? So what they're doing currently, what also from the different perspectives. So doing it, retrieving it, not finding it, things like that.
Yeah. So I've mapped some of the habits, what the things that are doing. It ranges between having fixed sync sessions to hiring dedicated technical writer roles to take over some of this responsibility. The fixed sync sessions work for smaller companies. The hiring dedicated roles is trickier because that's a budgetary issue. They've largely solved it through process hacks, right? But even there, it's a tricky one because the fixed sessions become drains because no one is looking forward to them. Sometimes they're even exhausting. People who really have to motivate teams to get things done. I even heard of people that are like in leadership and engineering that find all these ways to kind of like motivate the team to get to the point of actually doing that work. So that is one thing that we did explore. And then through the multiple due diligence projects that we did, we also figured out like, but how do you keep track of documentation? We keep asking this question, usually because we see that the documentation is probably not a nice way to put it, but it is very often it's not something you'd be extremely happy about.
Not satisfactory.
Exactly. So it could be a lot better. So there we're also trying to figure out like, is there something in your process that you need to do? Is there someone you can hire for this? Is there some other problem in the mix? And the problem is very often that if you're building hard things and you're moving fast, then you're always lacking time. And then it becomes really hard to say like, let's take parts of the engineering team and freeze them for a certain amount of time to get documentation on track. It almost has to
It sounds
flow
horrible.
naturally from the work. Yeah.
Yeah.
So now the question is, how
And
do you let it?
and how should then people document? Like how is there, you think a better workflow would be?
I think what you do with Git is effectively the workflow. You write things, maybe they're early stage, maybe they're not completely refined. They go through a review process, and only when they're approved. So when you go through the review process, people can comment on it, and that's the process of refining it. At some point, you land on something that you either reject or you merge. When it's merged, it's there. At that point, it's probably more of a high fidelity description, and then it's done. If you do that in par with writing the code, I think it makes life easier for you. First of all, you're doing it from the same folder, very likely. So there's very little reason to say like, I didn't have energy to navigate to this space. You can literally have the documentation pane open to the left while having the code pane open to the right, write things and jot down notes. You can even write down early stage notes while you're in dev that people can then reflect on in the review process. And then at some point you reduce it whenever you decide like, okay, we've settled on something, it works. All of these interim notes, we can reduce them into this very brief story, or in the far future, I can paraphrase things and suggest alternate descriptions if whatever they have is like crappy bullet points, which I like to write. I like crappy bullet points because that's all the level of information I need or like to read. And then other people will want to see sentences. Like, I'm not going to write that, but the machine can do that for me. Like, make some suggestions, 5 alternatives. I pick one, done with it.
And how do you know how people are doing that currently?
The documentation thing?
Yeah. So what you described to like having, so because I imagine like having open 2 text files, having this within the Git repo. There's nobody stopping you from doing that right now.
Kind of, because that needs to be documentation that's very often searchable for the entire org or for the entire eng org. So now the question is, where in the eng org is this thing documented? And there are no really slick or convenient interfaces to navigate that level of documentation, which is still why why GitHub and GitLab have separate wiki layers with actually isolated repositories for this problem. So there is no strong parity between what you're writing and the wiki of sorts. It usually lives in different places. So I would have to, in the typical case right now, I would either do it in Confluence or Notion, completely different tool, forget about it, or I would do it in GitHub or GitLab, which means it is a wiki repo, which is a different product. So I have to check out 2 different things, make changes in one, make changes in the other, 2 commits, and then I get towards resolution.
Do you know how many people are using this wiki functionality?
I've seen quite a bit of team. So the thing is, a bunch of teams tried them initially, and then they seem to pivot a bit away towards wider audience tooling. Like, because my product managers are not all on Git, whatever Forge I'm using. So maybe GitHub or GitLab, they're in this other tool. They are all in Notion if we use Notion as a company, or in Confluence. So at some point, teams pivot towards using Notion or Confluence because it's kind of like the wider audience tool. And that is kind of like where some of these the high proximity to repo wikis kind of get lost. For teams that are very heavy on the eng side and have less other roles involved, then I see a lot of use of like GitHub and GitLab wikis. But for teams that are a bit wider and also have the requirement that occasionally a salesperson needs to be able to search for things in there, then it quickly becomes a Notion-like thing.
Okay. Which ones are the more interesting to approach?
Tools.
No, I mean types. So because you said like there are the more engineering heavy, which are leaning towards like having everything in Git, and the other ones which are then always like defaulting to Notion, Confluence, the big players, because they are accessible for everybody.
I would focus on the engineering heavier ones, which I think that follows automatically from the deeper tech ones. They tend to be heavier on engineering, and they also have like more pain on the engineering side. So that's what they're optimizing to reduce. So there, I feel like when I look at those organizations, the engineering or research side tends to almost inform more strongly what the toolbox of choice is, and the rest kind of like has to learn it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Then I would look into what would be like a good structure for them and a good workflow for them. So to have so if they're already using wiki stuff or whatever things, to like where is the friction? Is it having 2 panes open in their editor? Is it connecting these 2 things? So is it some automation which is connecting documentation, whatever, or is it a VS Code plugin which is augmenting the documentation to the code and having this like logic in between? Is it how to structure things.
Yeah.
So is it more like because you could also start to just describing a good method how to do that.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
I think if you have this right, if you have like a good idea how people should do stuff, and then build the tooling around that, it's probably an easier entry.
Okay, and when you're saying this, like a method on how to do stuff, you're talking about kind of like templates, or are you talking about something else?
Yeah, it could be templates or methods. So looking at Obsidian, in the end, Obsidian is just an editor which is like
Mm-hmm.
giving you this graph thingy, and it's which giving you like some easier way to link around stuff. The
Yeah.
editor is not that fancy, and the whole thing is not that like special. There's a few functionality in Obsidian which makes it like an interesting tool.
Mm-hmm.
And or Logseq is about like coming from this journaling perspective. There's also not like a lot of stuff around this tool. It's more about like they have this way of thinking. You should
Yeah.
work like that, and
Yeah.
we help you through this tool.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I may not fully understand it yet. Maybe you can give me another example.
Yeah.
So I mean, like I know, like in terms of methods, I see that like there is a certain work philosophy. Let me try to paraphrase, see if I
Yeah.
maybe did
Yeah.
understand it. There's a certain way to work philosophy behind Obsidian Logseq
Mhm.
that kind of like make these tools really useful or basically best in class in that category.
Yeah.
Kind of like in the same way where Linear also has kind of like a philosophy of how to use
Yeah,
it. Like
they have a whole web
don't
page in what they're
exactly.
believing how project management should be.
Yeah,
Yeah,
whether you use stories or not, or epics or not, like stuff like
exactly.
that. It's a
Yeah,
radical decisions almost. Okay, so that is already kind of like qualifying as a method in your book.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, I hear you.
That more or less exactly what I mean. That you should
Okay.
because I think like especially documenting things is a lot about like how you
Yeah.
do it.
Yeah.
And if this like method, philosophy, idea, whatever doesn't fly, then you can build tooling. Um, but if nobody's thinking around this model, then it won't happen.
Sure. Yeah.
So I think my impression is the biggest challenge right now for you from a product side is to come up with like the right method how to document and make this really, really easy for people to do.
Okay, I have like ideas in my head already of how things should be done in terms of documenting. I just have to figure out the language around it.
You can also be really, really scrappy and I don't know, make a video how you do that, write an article how you do that, whatever. Just to have like also so one thing is like that this can be a validation point that you can like see like are people interested in that way of doing things. And in the other and even before, I think it forces yourself to be specific.
Yeah, I hear you. Okay, now I have to just draft something, a first version of it, and then experiment with how understandable it is. Let me see, that's on the list now. Cool, make a note of that. Let me go back to my notes. Let's see. Christoph had some good input. Let's go to the Christoph section. Oh, I'm not sharing my screen. Give me a second. Process of how to do things. Near, and what was it? Logseek. Once again, workflow tools. Yeah. Okay. I think I hear you there. And then maybe make a video out of that. So
yeah,
basically,
whatever feels like comfortable for you. Yeah, make a video, just show, really just showing. So I have this piece of code, or I'm writing like a simple hello world thingy, and I document it like that.
Yeah. Which you're probably already looking at it, because I mean, like most of it. Let me close this because that's confidential. Forgot about that. Yeah, it's not confidential. Nothing really confidential is in view, but that's the tooling I use to auto-generate my invoices. And if you go down in that page, there is very certainly some confidential stuff in there. Let me also fold all of this. Yeah. I mean, like this is, you're basically looking at it like everything I note take like this, and then I gradually expand on it, and it's really
and
fast.
how is this connected to code?
This is code. I basically.
Yeah, I mean to like software.
Oh, because I do the same thing for software projects. So if I go to FT, like so this is my product board where all of the interviews I'm having, I document in there. But I do the same thing for README, Eng. When I'm working on a specific topic, for example, let's say parser, I have even the issues I run into, problems that I run into, all entered into this thing to then look back, which is really fast and efficient for me to navigate, and I cross-link things. So let's say uni.org, there was a parser I used for something. There's a to-do that I still have to handle. I'll get back to it. But then I crossed out something that probably wasn't an issue anymore. So I have a very rich history of whatever I need, and then I move these tasks around. Like no one really cares about this stuff, but for me, it provides a lot of context. So the entire project, almost every technical decision that was made or was material is somewhere in there. Yeah.
And how would somebody retrieve that if they're just looking at a piece of like software code?
So in the repo for the code, you can basically link to things. So I could actually link to repos in here, which I don't think I've actively done yet. So this is effectively more of my prod engineering board, let's call it that. I haven't put this inside of the repo because although the code is not complicated enough to warrant it yet. For the parts that are more complicated, I basically have to-dos in the code base or notes in the code base. But like very extensive write-ups of like errors that we ran into that were resolved are basically in here, because this was where the ticket was defined. I dropped most of the error-related information in there and then gradually built it out from there.
Yeah, but I think that whole process, that would be interesting. Is this something people think they would work like that and are picking up?
Yeah.
And also looking at like I know a bunch of people who are also big fans like of org. So also looking into these communities, like what are their conventions which are already established around that, and then really looking into, okay, what's the missing tooling around that, and maybe
Yeah, so
it's
missing.
like pumping out stuff from there to Notion.
A lot of people have tried it, and those projects didn't really succeed. First of all, the Notion thing, API, pretty shitty. Good luck trying to figure that out. So there's going to be a lot of energy invested in trying to make that work. In the same way that a lot of people have written integrations into Confluence, and then those projects kind of like died. And my thesis is that trying to pump things into a secondary repository that you don't control is a resource investment that I can't justify right now, because you pump it into a locked format that doesn't try to make things easier for you, right? And the graphing isn't the thing that they're necessarily interested in. So you kind of like siphon out information.
Yeah, but it could also be then a web service.
A web service that pipes information into Confluence or Notion?
No. Having like this thing which is in some repo, just accessible from a website, an internal website.
Which is kind of like the scrappy prototype that we have.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. It could be something like that. Yeah. It could be a browser editor extension.
But this can happen. Like a lot of stuff has to be done in the daily work.
What do you mean with that? A lot of stuff has to be done in daily work.
So a developer has to like document while they are coding. They have to link the documentation to the code. They have to have some structure within their documentation.
Yeah.
Which is recognizable by your service. And then you can like auto generate something which is then searchable for non-technical people. And the question is like, is this your target group? Who is your target group? Is it like the technical people who don't like are not really comfortable making a text grab? Because you said before that like, yeah, the best thing is if I have it on my machine and just can grab it. So, but who has which pain points?
Yeah, the problem. Yeah, so the problem is like take any random team and you'll have a bunch of senior developers who feel a certain way about tooling, who are probably more comfortable grabbing around things, and then there is a larger common denominator that needs more help in navigating tool documentation or code. The thing is that you can't say like, oh, we're all just going to have repos locally. That doesn't work for a lot of people. That is too much to ask for. So you kind of have to find the path in the middle where if I want it on my machine and I can edit it there, let's go. I can do whatever I need with it. There's still a very clear structure to it, so it's not a wild west type of deal. That's why we need a standard that kind of like has a lot of the things codified in it that we may need. And then the people that aren't comfortable using this from another place, like the code directly, can use it through this other layer. And most engineering teams you'll find are laced with a bunch of juniors, a bunch of seniors that require you to use friendlier tooling for the juniors almost, right? Otherwise, you completely lose them, and then all the effort invested, a core part of the effort invested by the team is from the seniors and trying to get the juniors up to speed. And economically, you can't justify that decision very often. Then you would probably opt for just hiring seniors, which also isn't necessarily a tactical that works for everyone. So you just need to figure out something that is a bit more pragmatic. And of course, I think that Notion and Confluence have tried things very pragmatically, and have made some decisions there.
They're both not for like. I don't see that either Notion nor Confluence had like a developer persona somewhere in their
although they are kind of like the tools of choice, I agree that they're not designed very well for developers or engineers, but they have become the leading tools right now. I don't think there is
Yeah,
anything in the space that outcompetes a Confluence, even if I would
for
argue
sure.
that it doesn't meet the needs directly.
And
I mean, like, and that's why,
nobody's happy
Mhm.
with Confluence.
Yeah,
I never been in a company where they were like, "Hey, our Confluence is amazing." I've
yeah,
been like in companies who adapted Notion, and we are quite happy. But also, I never saw like really big documentation in Notion. It was usually some company wiki thing like how I don't know, how do I take vacation, and
yeah.
who are the
Employer
teams,
manuals,
and
employee
yeah,
manuals or
exactly,
something.
more
Yeah,
employee manuals than
yeah.
like technical documentation. And I think that's what I have seen in Notion, but I didn't see a lot of companies, bigger companies in Notion, so I don't know.
Hmm.
And Confluence, like I never ran into a company who had like a Confluence where everybody was like, yeah, that's a cool tool. It was like, ah, yeah, that's our content grade.
I see. Yeah. That's interesting. You say you also never ran into a blah blah blah, um, a company that had this solved very well. I wonder.
Because it's hard. Documentation is a hard thing,
Hmm.
and it's oftentimes, and I think there you have an interesting angle. It's oftentimes you have to do that on top, and a lot of people are shoving this into the end of the process. So that's a process
Hmm.
problem that people are like, ah, yeah, when we are done, we are documenting. Of course,
I hear
nobody's doing
you.
that, because then it's like, ah, yeah, cool, we are done. Let's do the next thing. Um, so and it's, yeah, it's hard, and it's like also like from a product perspective, I saw a lot of things like then they have like vast amounts of screenshots, and it's like, come
Hmm.
on, guys, like this pages are changing all the time. It doesn't make sense to do. It's more work to keep the
Up to date.
documentation up to date than like making progress on the product side.
Hmm.
um but I think, and there I think like that's the interesting point, that if you find like a method which makes it for technical documentation, just for like, let's look at technical documentation, um, to make it easy to document things in a in like the right granularity,
Yeah.
and making that somehow accessible for at least the engineering organization. And I think that's already enough for like engineering organization, and I would say like um, other people within teams who have like the who are invested enough and interested enough that they might use like not Confluence, but like go on a website or do whatever. So I'm a product person and a design person, and I wouldn't have a problem to, or I actually, what I do a lot with teams is also looking at their GitHub repos and
Hmm.
looking up stuff, because in the end there is what's the truth.
Source
And
of
if
truth.
there is
Absolutely.
like the documentation I need, I try to find it there. But
Yeah.
um
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, like going back to the source of truth, I feel like that is a central theme that comes back over and over again. That's also why I think that trying to put things closer to the source of truth better.
mm,
If it could just be the source of truth, even better. Um, there is this. I mean, like with things like Copilot advancing as they are, there is
mm,
probably also a path to like ask natural language style questions based on a code base and get answers from them.
yeah,
Um,
uh,
and like I think that's also the whole idea that we've been flirting with, is that in the long tail, that is probably closer to what it's going to look like.
mm,
Um, but in order to be able to facilitate that, you kind of like need the explicitly written docs in
Yeah.
combination with the code to be able to either train models or to fine tune things.
Mm.
And then in the long tail, you can kind of like give that almost level of how do you call it, like the reasoning engine or a very
Yeah.
simple like parsing toolbox to basically parse whatever's there, parse the question against it, and then
Yeah.
answer that
Yeah.
prompt.
Yeah.
But that's not going to happen
But
tomorrow.
no. But what's with stuff? So I think there's quite some standardization around like how to document APIs, right? So there's like you have like all these REST APIs, and you just there's like a standard, as far as I know, or a few standards, how you like have within the code documentation
Yeah,
stuff to auto generate like a web documentation.
sure. Yeah, okay, to auto generate documentation, yes, absolutely. You can also do things like OpenAPI/Swagger um, to basically document your APIs as well.
Mm.
Um,
I have Swagger right there.
yeah,
That's the
that's
thing.
probably the most famous way to do it for APIs
Yeah,
at the moment. There's like a
yeah,
bit of effort involved in kind of like making sure that whatever accompanying documentation is there
mm,
exists. But other than that, I think these are kind of like the tools that are closest to winning when at least for user-facing documentation, because usually you're making API docs for end users, so you need something that's more user-facing. Internally, it would be used to a limited extent because the moment you
yeah,
want to know internal working, the surface
yeah,
level documentation doesn't help you anymore.
yeah, no,
So then you have to just go back to the machine.
yeah,
Yeah. But something
mm,
like that works. It gets trickier if you actually have to parse actual programs. But again, I think with whatever your developments you see on like the Copilot type of things, it should
mm,
get increasingly easier to take code and have it and basically characterize in bullet points what it's doing. Um, but that's something that's a research effort, right? You have to experiment with it, see how far you get, see to which
mm,
extent the approach that we have right now is tenable, to which extent you have to do something else, more
mm.
rule based, like symbolic AI type of things instead of like deep neural nets or whatever. Um, so that is just a long tail research effort that where you're probably not going to see meaningful products over the next half year.
Half year.
Well, I don't know how fast things move. Like everything beyond like half a
That's
year is
good. Yeah,
infinity
but that
above, yeah,
yeah, but
beyond
that's
me.
crazy.
I mean, like, what was it? Oh, like like Dali and Midjourney were like the leading models half a year ago. Now
Yeah,
we can,
no.
and we thought like we
Uh,
need bigger machines like to run these models because people are training like multiple billion parameters. Now you have like stable diffusion that makes pretty decent images, like lovely images
yeah,
actually,
yeah,
and you
on
can run it
your
on your
machine.
laptop.
Yeah, yeah, I know.
Yeah, and I mean, like I couldn't. It's interesting to see those developments because they probably happened more or less somewhat in parallel to people building bigger models, and then somewhere
Mm,
in parallel, someone was like building tiny models, and then a tiny model kind of like
mm,
worked, and like holy crap, we basically jumped from this. This is such a massive gap I feel between these
yeah,
both extremes. Um,
yeah, yeah, totally. Yeah.
that's also why it's not sure what is already cooking on this front that in half a year might emerge that changes the game
Mm,
fundamentally.
mm,
I think I do feel that there is currently not a consensus yet, but there is currently talk within the machine learning community that we probably can't solve whatever we thought we were going to solve with deep neural nets, and we're probably
yeah.
going to have to, like, you remember the first, or not the first, the previous winter happened when
Mm.
people were trying to solve things with symbolic AI. That didn't work out because it was really complicated to formally
What's
define what
symbolic
I looks
AI?
like. It's basically more you define symbols and relations between them. So it's more
Okay.
like the paradigm where experts define, oh, we're in the insurance business. These are
Mm,
kind of like the symbols that exist in insurance, and
mm,
these are the relationships that exist, and these are constraints that must be honored at all
okay.
times. And then you move away, or hmm?
Yeah.
Yeah, and another example of that, what's a bit more easier to map to whatever's happening now, is like, oh, we're trying to do models that detect cats. this is what a cat is: something with two eyes, with a nose, and pointy ears, which is tricky because there are multiple things that meet those constraints. So you're probably going to match against a lot of other things that aren't cats.
But you mean like then rule-based stuff?
Rule-based, but that's hard,
Okay.
right? Because you have to figure
Yeah,
out
yeah,
how
that's
to.
impossible. Yeah.
Yeah, it was. I don't know if it's impossible. There
Yeah,
have been.
or it's like it's
Yeah,
crazy complex because there's so
exactly.
many edge cases and there's so many like
Absolutely.
yeah
And then we parked that, thinking it's
yeah
impossible. Then GPUs happened and made this
yeah
thing that was previously ridiculously inefficient compute efficient again.
yeah
Because the whole idea
that
of like
the
training
whole
these deep neural nets, you could have
yeah
forgotten it in the 80s.
the whole
Now we're
machine
doing it like
learning
it's nothing. Yeah.
yeah
So basically, we're piggybacking on top of the game industry that gave us GPUs, and now all of a sudden things are
yeah
possible that weren't.
yeah
And now we're realizing that, oh, the explainability of these models is pretty shitty. No one has a clear handle on what's really going on. There are
yeah
really interesting ways to spoof or trick the systems.
mm,
Probably we won't get the type of robustness that we need. And
mm.
now we're circling back to, oh, we're probably going to have to combine both somehow. What
Ah,
the
okay
balance is going to be is unclear,
mm,
but we're probably going
mm,
to have deep neural nets detect certain things that are pattern recognition based, then have symbolic
ah,
models on top of that to basically enforce, or basically to inject awareness of relations, ontologies, and constraints.
mm,
Um, and also then introduce explainability, because now you can audit a system, because
yeah
an expert can look at the rules, see what the vulnerabilities are, or actually run tests against them that can be
mm,
formally defined. That is an interesting idea.
mm,
So let's see how that works.
mm,
I'm very sure that there's going to be a lot ongoing in the deep learning space for a long time. Um, I don't know what long time means in my head, but I'm guessing 2 years is a very long time for me. But I'm pretty
mm.
sure it's going to be there for a while. I do know that there is a resurgence in interest in symbolic AI. I think that's going to be
Interesting.
very important going forward. Um, yeah, it's all equilibrium, I guess, as with most things, finding the right
Mm,
balance of things to put together.
yeah
Yeah,
okay.
but yeah,
Yeah, I didn't know
interesting.
that the rule-based stuff is called symbolic. Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Mm.
I think it's where much of it started, actually.
Yeah, and
Um,
I did like years ago, like in this whole language generation stuff.
mhm.
So this whole
Yeah,
NLP toolkits
computational
thing.
linguistics. There was a
Exactly.
lot of work in that category. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
interesting. Cool.
Hmm. Okay. I think I have to jump off. I'm getting
Perfect.
hungry.
Yeah, I have to go
I have
sleep.
to
It's
do
already
some
past
stuff.
midnight here.
Yeah.
Um, and I know that Lini is probably watching and hoping for me to get home so I get some rest for tomorrow's list of
Yeah.
activities. Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks for doing this together. The whole stream, we
Yeah.
kind of like segued from a private call into this public thing by
Yeah.
not coincidence, but kind of like simply because he didn't have enough time. And
Yeah.
then it was
All
actually
good.
really nice to have this sparring session on where things are going and what to focus on. So thanks for your time. Um, I'll
For
keep you
sure.
posted on updates. I have a bunch of
Yeah.
interviews with a bunch of companies, so I'm getting more and more insights into how they
Yeah.
work and what might or might not be feasible for them.
Yeah. I
So,
really would try to have like document with like pain points, workflows, really to have like an overview, what people are telling you about
mhm,
their thing, and then always like ask them two things. The first thing, like ask them really about the situation, because
mhm,
sometimes people are making stuff up or are imagining problems that they
yeah.
just don't have in reality.
Yeah, so
And
wouldn't you think
yeah,
that actually shadowing them how they really work is probably a
yeah,
more honest way
that
to find it out?
yes, but I think especially for this thing, it's like quite you have to spend like a lot of time
Mm-hmm.
there because it's like what they're doing. The so really shadowing it while they're working. I don't know. I think that the time invested and what you get back is probably not that crazy interesting. But what they're more interesting, I think, that they should show you documentation and they should show you like actual what they are doing.
Okay, but
And
that's
then
a
you
good
can
one.
dig deeper.
Which
Really,
which
like
is
just
exactly what I do during due diligence, where I grill them on this, not on the spot. I don't grill them, but I tell them, okay, show me the documentation, walk me through how you converge on this, how often is it documented or updated. Let's look at the code.
yeah, just like ask, like just like
Hmm.
don't bring in any ideas, don't bring any like how you would do it or that you think
Hmm.
about or whatever. Just like get them talking about what they're doing and then also ask them like how does this work for you?
Yeah. Okay.
Ah,
Yeah.
you're
Then I
using
can.
Confluence. How does it work for you? Um, and did you try something else? Did this work?
Mhm. Perfect. Yeah. But which is then basically us already tapping on all the DD intuition where we asked exactly those questions like, so talk, why did you move from Confluence to Notion or back, or like what is working
Yeah,
for you? What isn't
exactly.
working? How do you
Yeah,
update?
exactly.
What's your pain point? Um,
Yeah, and
why
always
is there
like
no documentation?
always
Hmm.
emphasize like on real experience that they're really
Yeah.
telling you about. So you can also like if they are like because people are usually when you interview them, they're like telling you what they want or what
Hmm.
they imagine, what other also like a really a red uh, really a red flag is if people are saying I can imagine or I think, then they're talking about something they haven't experienced personally, that
Okay.
they just projecting, that they're just like so people are like, yeah, I don't have really a problem with documentation and it's thing,
Oh
but
yeah,
I
but
think
that's a
but I
good point.
think
Yeah.
people struggle with this and that. And then you can ask like, did you struggle with this lately? Can you tell me about the situation you had?
Hmm.
And then if people are like, no, I don't have this problem, then it's probably not a problem to solve because
I hear
if the
you.
person you're not talking to does have this problem and he's just imagining that there is this problem, if you don't find anybody with this actual problem, then there is no money in it.
Yeah.
And yeah, always try to like go back to ask them about a concrete situation, and then let them walk you through that. And the best thing, especially if like it's documentation, it's code, so it's like it should be there. Can you show me?
Hmm.
And can you walk me through that? How did you end up with the documentation? Is it is somebody using it?
Hmm. Yeah, okay, perfect. But I think we understand each other. Effectively, this is a summary of effectively the DD process that we go through, where we say like, are people using us? Walk me through it, show me the documentation, and we always look at the artifacts. We never really listen to what they're saying.
Yeah,
We
exactly.
need to see
Yeah,
how it works,
yeah,
and
yeah.
sometimes we
And
even
then
get
really
access to it so we can
and
see
then
the
I think
history.
in difference to the DD, then you have to
Hmm.
dig deeper. Then you have to ask like, oh, why is it like that? Why
Which
are
we
you
also
in?
ask in a DD. So, how
Okay.
deep would you say is deep enough? Because we have like product only walkthroughs, or we have like full hours
So
where
what
we're
what
just
you
going
are
through
in
wiki
the end, what you
documentation.
are really interested in from a
Hmm.
product perspective is um, where is your pain point? Where would you
Hmm.
give me $100 today if I solve this problem for you?
Hmm. You probably
And the
give me
people
$100 today.
shouldn't tell you the solution and shouldn't
Hmm.
like tell you, but you want to see the problem they're having, they're struggling with, and
Yeah.
they trying they spending an hour after their shift end, more or less to Google stuff how they can fix this.
Hmm.
That's where
Hmm.
your interesting product is. If people are like, yeah, I searched like for methods and I'm always like watching these YouTube videos from people who are having the perfect concept how to document, and then I fail, and then you can ask like, yeah, and why are you? Which one is it? And why are you not following it? Then they might tell you, because I don't get like the grip of it, or I tell you, yeah, but I would do it, but my documentation has to be read by this product manager, or so.
Roger that.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I have like I have a couple of interviews lined up with some folks who are doing exactly that, walking through the tooling they have, the
Very
struggles
good.
they have. In the DD, I believe that in the DD we kind of like dive deep enough as well to kind of like really understand how they ended up with no documentation or poor documentation and what the pain points are. So I think between at least between Simon, Louis, and I, there's so much data there of the intuitions that we probably have to like formalize more on paper, from at least the observations that we have, and then from the interviews that we're still going to have. But I
It's
would
also an
argue.
interesting angle, the DD angle, because the engineer is not caring about the DD. The CTO is caring about the stuff, but it's a totally different,
Sure.
like, designer buyer perspective.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But that was already pretty much in our mind, where we need the designer, we need the engineers. The two users are kind of like the individual contributors, but also the managers who need to extract this insight, maybe metrics or read whatever's going on. They just want the results there. The buyer is the CTO effectively, or an engineering head that has a budget to spend. That those two
No, but I
people,
think
those personas are very
the
different.
question is the question is like, what's the pain point? Because like, if the pain point is for a developer that the documentation is not there and they can't figure stuff out, it's a completely different story than having documentation for DD.
Yeah. So the thing is, we don't look, the documentation for a DD is not architected for a DD. We basically come into the company to look at the existing docs. So we see docs that are production docs, what you use on a
Yeah,
day-to-day
of
basis
course.
to work. Yeah. So I wouldn't think that documentation for DD is as interesting of a space as documentation to build cool things, which is basically the documentation that companies build for themselves.
Yeah,
So I think that there is a lot more in that category, because at the end of the day, the DDs happen rarely. If you're a really strong company, you probably don't even have that extensive of a DD because your work speaks for itself almost. But in order to be a company like that, you need to stay on top of things, and that means that the key actors need fast access to critical data, key data. If they can't get it, they're wasting time and you're moving too slow. So at the end of the day, I believe that certain companies will just win because they're moving faster than others, and that is going to be a key differentiator between them. So you also see those companies optimizing for efficiency internally. So that's why I'm also talking to the deep tech companies, because they, more than like a random SaaS company, they probably have much stronger drives to keep it all together. Also, because the moment a dev turns out that had private nodes, we lost a considerable amount of IP effectively, or intel that we can't recover without putting another person through 5 weeks or more of work. So that is kind of like the focal area that we're trying to fixate on. That's also why basically agencies that are working on websites would definitely not be a category for us to focus on. That's not hard enough. Yeah. So I think we have we have identified a certain area where the pain is big enough, where people are also constantly churning out of engineering organizations, which is already a pain that people are addressing with perks and all these other things just to keep them there. Everyone has a hiring problem, so talent is already a problem. So that means keeping intel together so you can keep moving fast, key. So we're talking to the CTO who feels that pain the most, because that person has to report to the board on why we're not this fast in delivering. That person also has to get the buy-in from the entire team to use tools. We have to make sure that for the people that are going to use them, they're not more painful than the incumbent tools, which is a low bar, because the incumbent tools are frustrating to work with for
Yeah.
that cohort.
Yeah.
I also realize that most product people don't really, from the product people we've interviewed, they didn't necessarily hate the tools that exist with as much of a passion as engineers. And then the junior people
No, yeah.
didn't hate the tools as much as the
Because
more
it,
senior people,
yeah, because they
because they
didn't
don't know.
have to use it, and they don't have to use it that much probably. Yeah.
Exactly. But it's the
Yeah.
senior most folks who are like, whatever,
Yeah.
I
Doing
really don't care.
architecture and
So
whatever. Yeah.
exactly. So that's why when we get inputs from product people or junior engineering people, we also have to be careful in the weighting of that information, because they are not the ones struggling the greatest. It's mostly the senior most engineers that are also more expensive and probably way more critical to the success of a company if they were to go away. Those are the ones that we have to make more productive.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then especially if you then say like a senior engineer for a hard tech company, goodness, that's a lot of work, because then you're
Yeah.
talking about what's his name, Greg Brock or whatever, the previous CTO of OpenAI, characters like that, the amount of
Okay.
information they have to peddle, or like that Andrei Karpathy figure that worked at Tesla and OpenAI, I believe, who writes a lot of papers on this material as well, like how they manage to keep all that information together, make sure the team is in the know, such that when they move out, things don't completely get lost. That is the reason why we're talking to deep tech companies now, to understand more of their methods, processes, and tools.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that sounds good. So having really looking deep into one specific field, looking at their pain, also looking at this knowledge loss thingy,
Yeah.
which is a very different pain point than like an individual pain point.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like, I think I also think that in the knowledge management on the individual side, there are plenty of tools out there. Have your pick. Like, I don't think that's a problem worth solving on our end. Our end is more teams building hard things. That is effectively the focal point. So we're just going to ignore the things that are more tied to individual preferences too much, and figure out like what is more important for the team. And I'm very convinced that we're going to land on something solid there. We're getting pretty good feedback. I would like to get much more data before I basically, how do you call it? Yeah, I would like to get much more data before we actually go talk to investors about these things, because I always feel like I want to have much stronger signals. So that's also the reason why we're talking to companies now. But I am very convinced also by my own frustration and experience that this is something that needs tackling. And I haven't yet stumbled across a company that did it well. And I've seen a variety of companies, also really good companies, and even they seem to be struggling with some of this.
Yeah, totally.
Or maybe I also know that there might be some selection bias, and that I just ended up in like subpar companies. Who knows? Maybe that's what happened. I just ended up I basically got filtered into the companies that aren't the creme de la creme, and that's why
But
everything was.
that's also not so interesting, because like most companies are mediocre, so by definition.
True.
So that's the biggest market in the end. So
Yeah,
if
true.
I don't know if the mangas and whatever are not buying your tool, they probably won't anyways, because they do everything by themselves because they know better.
Okay.
And they have like the resources to do that. So I wouldn't aim to that. I would like aim for so a specific market, but like not for one company who is like the perfect company. That's not a market.
True. Yeah, we're not picking a single company. You're right. We're just going for those deep tech goes, and we talk to as much of them as we can, and then we
And
learn,
I think
and then we
that
see what
even
works out.
if looking at deep tech, there are probably like thousands of companies. So that's probably a a big enough market.
I think so. I also think that quite honestly, going forward, there's probably going to be a lot more of that happening. I mean, you already see
Exactly.
like there is a lot more. There are a lot more startups getting founded in that category.
Yeah.
A lot of these other things are becoming commodity. I think whatever agencies are doing, parts of that is becoming commoditized, and more human capital is going to go into deeper tech problems, or
Yeah.
So I think that if you're going to build harder things, and you have the same brain to act with, maybe a stronger computer, then you clearly need to figure out how to retrofit or support that same brain to be
Yeah.
able to tackle those harder problems.
Yeah.
And I
Of
don't
course.
think we do that simply by becoming smarter. That happens too slowly.
Yeah.
We're gonna have to do it by having better tooling.
Yeah.
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 And now, I mean, like,
Cool.
imagine like writing code. Most teams are probably not going to write lines of code anymore in 5 years. They're probably just going to rip it out of Copilot. Who knows? But plenty of teams are already ripping considerable amount of code out of Copilot. But yeah,
Yeah.
I think
Yeah. Of course. Yeah.
we had a good chat here.
Yeah.
Thanks for your time, Christoph.
Yes.
You enjoy the nice morning out there in DC. I'm gonna enjoy my
Yeah.
midnight stroll and then some
Yes.
quality
Do
sleep, I
that.
guess.
Do
And
that.
then
Have
we'll
a
talk
nice night.
soon.
Yes. Have a great
All
night.
right.
See you
Have a
soon.
good one. Ciao, ciao. All right. Time to go to bed, folks. Was a good chat. Good chat. So I basically pivoted a product consulting sesh into a live stream. How about that? Cool, 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 cool. Mm. Let's see. Three more folks out here. Funny. Y'all go get some. Oh no, yeah, you probably don't have to sleep. Different time zones. I don't know from where people are checking in. I know that Stefano is there. Stefano, have a lovely rest of the day. It's 1840 out there, so you're also wrapping up the day. Enjoy dinner. Have a good night's rest. Lini, I'm coming home. Voiti, if you're still there, take care. It was good seeing you. Thanks for checking in. Y'all have a lovely rest of the week. I got some rest to get and some work to do tomorrow. Ciao.